My name is Aveline, and I am 36 years old. I had just been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer at a major media company in Chicago. That evening, I left the office late, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, but my heart was light, thinking my parents would be waiting for me in the home I had poured nearly all of my savings into. But what greeted me was a sight I will never forget. My father sat hunched on the front steps, clutching his chest, his lips bluish from the cold. My mother was beside him, her hands trembling as she pulled her thin coat tighter, eyes filled with confusion as she stared at the door of my house, the house I bought so they could spend their later years in peace. Inside, bright lights, music flowing, the clinking of glasses echoing like mockery, strangers in tailored suits and glittering gowns raising their glasses in my living room. Not one of them was someone I knew. They were friends of my mother-in-law. The locks had been changed, and I, the one who had paid 75% of this house, could not get into my own home. Have you ever been pushed out of your own life, right in front of the people you love most? When those you thought were family cast you aside just to keep their idea of perfection intact? If this story stirs something in your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to my channel to walk with me through the rest of the story. Because what happened afterward is something that family of his will never forget. I rushed to my father, kneeling beside him in the biting wind that cut through his coat. His rough, calloused hands were still warm but shaking with each beat. My mother crouched close, her back curved from years of standing by hospital beds, her face pale under the merciless cold air. "Come inside with me," I whispered, voice caught in my throat. But the door was locked. And the old key I had in my purse, useless. Standing there on those steps, memories flooded back sharp as an old film reel. The day I received my college acceptance letter, an expensive private school in another state, my father had come home early from the night shift. He placed an envelope on the kitchen table, every cent he had saved in a tin can hidden in the cupboard after 10 years of overtime at the steel mill. My mother sat up all night sewing new linings into her old winter coat, adjusting it so I could wear it in the city. She said, "It's colder there, you have to stay warm. If you get sick, I won't be able to sleep." Every night in my dorm, while I ate instant noodles, my mom sent photos of her homemade braised pork with a note, "I saved this part for you." My father called every Friday night without fail. Just a few short words, but they made me feel the whole world tilted in my favor. I didn't grow up with wealth, but I never lacked love. My father always told me, "My daughter will never have to bow her head to anyone. We may live with less, but you will have enough." That was the foundation I stepped into the world with. No one saw the early years when I worked myself ragged, juggling an MBA program and 2 part-time jobs, but my parents saw it. They never came to my company's award ceremonies, but they framed my very first employee badge and hung it in their kitchen, right beside their 30-year-old wedding photo. I saved and planned, bought this house, so they would always have a place nearby during storms, or when mom needed long treatments for her arthritis at the hospital. I carefully chose the downstairs bedroom so she wouldn't have to climb stairs. I stocked dad's medicine in the fridge, on the easiest shelf to reach. I did all this not out of duty, but out of love, rooted in years of sacrifice. And now, they sat outside like strangers, shivering in front of the house I once thought would be their safest haven. I gripped my father's hand, trying to steady myself. "Wait here, I'll fix this." I hurried around to the backyard. Strings of golden lights dangled like a luxury resort. The smell of grilled meat, the smooth tones of jazz, laughter spilling from people I didn't know. None of them had ever asked my parents' names. None had ever stepped into the old kitchen where my mom baked cookies in a secondhand oven so I'd have snacks to take to class. And then I saw Linda, my mother-in-law, holding a glass of wine, commanding the crowd of women in silk dresses and fur coats. Her face glowed with confidence and elegance, as if she owned this place. I pounded on the glass door hard enough to make a waiter flinch. He slid it open just a crack and said flatly, "The main entrance is in the front, ma'am." "My parents are outside. They need to come in now," I said quickly. "My father has a heart condition. He's cold and struggling to breathe." He hesitated, glanced toward Linda, as if waiting for permission. She strolled over, eyes sweeping over me from head to toe. "Pego, Aveline, what's all this? The locks were changed. I can't get in, and my parents are sitting outside in the cold." "Oh," she smirked. "Charles probably had them replaced for safety. New houses, lots of people around. No one wants strangers wandering in, right?" "They're my parents," I nearly shouted. "And this is my house." Linda shrugged as though I were overreacting. "The party's going on. It's really not the time for a scene. Maybe you could take them out to dinner until we're finished here? 11 o'clock should be fine." I froze. To her, my parents' lives could wait. "So you locked them out in the cold just to make this party convenient?" She didn't answer. She turned her back and stepped inside. The glass door slid shut, sealing me out again, away from the light and warmth. Laughter carried on inside as though nothing had happened. I ran back to the front. My father's head had slumped onto my mother's shoulder, his breathing ragged. I knelt down, checked his pulse, ice-cold fingers, heartbeat faint. My mother's trembling hand touched my shoulder, whispering, "His chest hurts." I screamed toward a neighbor stepping out of her car, "Please call an ambulance." A middle-aged woman, Carol, I remembered greeting her once, while walking my dog, rushed over, wrapping a blanket around my mother as she dialed 911. She squeezed my shoulder firmly. "I'm here. Don't worry." I nodded, though inside me was a grief I couldn't name. The house I built with my sweat and sacrifice had become the place where my parents nearly lost their lives. The sirens wailed from down the street. I held my father's hand tight, staring at my house where someone decided I no longer belonged. I sat silently in the ambulance, gripping my mother's hands as the medics checked my father's heart rate, blood pressure, and gave him oxygen. The flashing lights reflected on the windows, heavy as my chest. With every turn of the siren's echo, the images blurred memories and reality merging in painful clarity. When Ethan walked into my life 6 years ago, I once believed fate knew exactly what it was doing. We met at a tech conference in Austin. I was the keynote speaker in a session about data strategy in media, and he was there representing a rival firm, seated across the room with a confident expression and eyes locked on me as if I were the only person there. We spoke afterward, starting with professional questions, then moving to hobbies, life philosophies, and family. Ethan made me laugh more than I expected. There was something about him, his calmness, his gentle smile, his depth, that made me feel seen. I don't usually open up easily, but with him, it felt natural, like we'd known each other for years. He told me about his privileged childhood in Connecticut. His mother, Linda, had once been a sociology professor before shifting to image consulting for politicians. Sharp, stylish, always leaving a strong impression. His father, Charles, ran a successful construction company, retiring early after selling his shares for millions. Even in retirement, he still spoke the language of markets and influence, treating attention as if it were currency. Back then, I saw nothing wrong. I felt proud that Ethan wanted me to meet his family. He often told me I was strong, capable, that I made him feel enough. The early months of our relationship were filled with passion and inspiration. We drafted startup ideas together, shared big dreams, built bold visions. I thought if there was anyone mature enough to walk the long road with me, it had to be him. Meeting his family took place at a French restaurant on the Upper East Side. Linda entered in a pearl-colored dress, a trace of Chanel perfume filling the air. She smiled politely, shook my hand, then sat down with an assessing gaze. Charles opened with, "So, which MBA program did you attend? Princeton or Yale?" When I gave the name of my school, he nodded slightly, sipping his wine as if weighing an investment decision. It was awkward, but I smoothed things over. Ethan sat beside me, holding my hand under the table as if to say, "I'm here." And indeed, in those early days, he always defended me when Linda hinted my outfits were too plain, or when Charles suggested Ethan should handle the finances entirely, as men should these days. After our wedding, things seemed calmer. We moved into a small condo, decorating it together, from bookshelves to potted plants. Ethan made breakfast every Sunday, then joined me at my parents' house for lunch. Mom adored him for helping clean the table, and Dad was touched when he brought home a special brand of coffee, even if it meant driving an hour away. I thought, even if his family was different, Ethan himself was a husband who knew better, someone strong enough not to be swayed by superficial things. But slowly, the signs appeared. He started taking his mother's calls in the middle of our dinners, or pausing our business plans to consult with her. Anytime Linda had an opinion, whether about a sofa or a stock investment, Ethan obeyed. "I get that your mom went to Harvard," I once said when she dropped off blueprints to remodel our kitchen with stainless steel cabinets. "But this is our kitchen. She just cares," Ethan replied without looking at me. "She has great taste." That's when I started to feel pushed aside in my own home. Our conversations grew shorter, our agreements fewer. Every time I wanted to discuss finances, Ethan said, "Let me ask Mom. She's invested in real estate. She'll know best." I never denied Linda's intelligence, but what I needed was a partner to decide with me, not a dutiful son running every choice by his mother. Things peaked when we discussed buying a house. I suggested a place within budget, with enough space for my parents to stay long-term if needed. Ethan agreed until Linda called me, voice laced with finality. "You should let Ethan choose a neighborhood that reflects his status. Don't drag my son into something so ordinary, like the kind of girl from Ohio would." I hung up, heart pounding. From Ohio, she meant my mother. I told Ethan, hoping he'd take my side or at least show he was upset. But he only said, "She didn't mean it. She just speaks directly." The more time passed, the lonelier I felt in my own marriage. Ethan was still kind in small ways, Friday flowers, fresh coffee every morning, but in the big things, he wasn't beside me. He was behind his parents. And that evening, when I saw my parents curled up on the doorstep while Ethan was somewhere inside raising his glass with strangers, I realized that small acts of kindness could never make up for his absence in the moments that mattered most. The wail of the ambulance siren cut through my thoughts. I turned to my mother. She placed her hand on mine and squeezed gently. "It's all right, sweetheart. I don't blame Ethan. But the house is locked now, isn't it?" I nodded. She glanced at my father, struggling to breathe through the oxygen mask. Her voice caught, "If something happens to him, I won't be able to forgive." My father was rushed straight into the emergency room as soon as the ambulance stopped at the hospital entrance. I walked alongside the stretcher, holding his hand, the palm icy cold as if it had never known warmth. My mother followed quietly behind, her eyes fixed on his still figure. Doctors and nurses spoke rapidly, their voices urgent but steady. One of them handed me a consent form for emergency intervention. I signed, my hand trembling so badly the letters slanted and uneven. When the treatment room door closed, I guided my mother to a seat in the hallway, draping the spare coat from my bag over her shoulders. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. We didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any reproach. Then my mother whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear, "I've endured many things, but some things should never be treated so lightly." I didn't answer. My mind was crowded with overlapping images, memories that hurt even though no one ever spoke of them. At our engagement dinner, Linda hadn't hesitated. The moment my parents walked into the restaurant, she looked them up and down and offhandedly said, "Sweetheart, next time remind your parents to choose something a bit more upscale. We're taking keepsake photos after all." I glanced at my parents, both dressed properly. My father wore his old suit, pressed perfectly by my mother's careful hands. My mother wore the navy blue dress I had given her for her birthday. Yet Linda's look was enough to make her blush and smooth the hem of her dress as though trying to hide something. I remember Ethan looked at me, forcing a smile, then pulled me aside to ease the tension. Not a word in defense. Not a single sign that he thought his mother was wrong. I once thought maybe I was being overly sensitive, that Linda had grown up in another world, that she didn't mean harm, that I needed to learn how to adapt to the upper class language, the glances they gave outsiders, that unspoken culture I'd never been taught. I tried to compromise, I swallowed it. Then came the wedding. Ethan and I had agreed on something small and warm, about 80 guests, mostly close friends and family. I personally chose lavender for the table flowers because it was my mother's favorite. The cake was ordered from a small family bakery in my old neighborhood, the same place that had made my graduation cake, buttercream soft and light with hand-piped purple blossoms. Linda said nothing when I shared the plan, but 3 days later, I received an email from the event planner with the subject line, "Detailed update from Mrs. Linda Sullivan." The guest list had jumped to 175. The flowers had been replaced with a French cream white arrangement. The wedding cake was swapped for a two-tiered one covered in 24-karat gold. I called Ethan immediately, panic rising. I never agreed to this. Nobody asked me. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom just wants the wedding to be perfect. She knows sponsors for the flowers and cake. She's trying to save us money." "Save money or control?" he sighed. "Aveline, you know how she island. She always wants everything to look polished. This will pass quickly. What matters is that after the wedding we have each other." And I let it go again. Back then, I thought, if I was the one to keep the peace, the family would be better. If I was soft enough, Linda would ease up. If I endured, Ethan would see my effort and eventually learn to stand with me. During the wedding, just as I was about to greet his relatives, Linda grabbed my arm, eyes flicking toward my parents standing near the buffet. Her voice was gentle, but the words cut sharp. "I'll introduce them, but maybe keep them away from the deputy mayor's group. First impressions are hard to undo." I smiled and nodded like a machine. My mother was still beaming then, shaking hands with someone she thought was a relative. Her eyes shone with hope, and I couldn't bring myself to shatter it. After the wedding, I thought things would ease. But for Linda, it was only the beginning of shaping the ideal daughter-in-law. She sent me lists of furniture showrooms, suggesting decor styles in line with the Sullivan standard. She suggested new hairstyles, attaching photos of cropped bobs she called elegant and business-friendly. Charles gave us investment gifts every holiday, stocks, small shares in projects he was eyeing, all in Ethan's name. One day I asked Ethan, "Doesn't it seem strange that everything about us is decided by them?" He sat quietly, then replied, "They just want us to have a stronger foundation. That's how they operate. Can't you be a little more flexible?" I looked at him, disappointment heavy in my chest. "And what about me? Who's flexible with me?" Ethan didn't answer. He stared down at his cold coffee, silent, as if he hadn't heard. That night I lay awake, restless. Inside me was a hollow space I couldn't define. I had married a man who once made me feel strong, yet now he made me doubt myself. I had joined a family that didn't welcome me as one of their own, but as a guest under constant scrutiny. And what I never expected was that after all my efforts to compromise, to yield, to step back, it still wasn't enough for them to see me as part of the family. They didn't want me to join as myself. They wanted me to become the version they had designed, and every action of mine, no matter how small, if it didn't fit their mold, was branded rebellion. I still remember that autumn afternoon when Ethan and I held the keys to our new home, standing on the front steps, a two-story house at the end of a quiet street in the northern suburbs of Chicago, lined with bright red maples, a small yard perfect for planting lavender and herbs my mother loved. Walking in felt like opening the door to the result of years of sweat and sacrifice. I had spent nearly all my savings from 11 years of work plus a recent project bonus to cover 75% of the down payment. All those late nights at the office, holidays skipped for urgent deadlines wrapped into that key in my hand. Ethan's contribution was smaller, mostly from an investment account supported by his parents. When I suggested specifying ownership percentages in the contract, Ethan froze. "Is that necessary?" he asked. "I mean, if my family finds out you contributed more, they'll be uncomfortable. They think I'm the provider. You don't want to create distance from the start, right?" I stared at him, taken aback by the reasoning. But then I told myself, we're building a home, not a balance sheet. So I agreed, thinking trust was enough. I didn't know that vagueness would later become the space where others could step in and take what I thought was mine. I spent weeks planning every corner of that house. A warm-toned wood living room with soft lighting so my father could read at night without glare. A kitchen by the garden window so my mother could cook while watching the plants. A downstairs bedroom designed specifically for them to stay low bed, non-slip rug, and a medicine cabinet within easy reach. I told Ethan all of this with excitement I couldn't hide. He smiled and nodded. "Sounds wonderful. Your parents will be touched." On their first visit, I cleaned the house, made chicken soup for my mom, and bought the exact black coffee my dad loved. That afternoon, I trimmed the flowers by the porch, my heart swelling like a child about to show off a good grade. But the black sedan that pulled up wasn't my parents'. Linda stepped out, followed by a blonde woman wearing a name tag that read Amelia, design consultant, and a tall man carrying rolled blueprints. I walked out, confused. "Hello, Mom, what's going on?" Linda removed her sunglasses, flashing that smile that meant, if you have to ask, you don't understand. She gestured toward her companions. "I think it's time to turn this house into a space worthy of you two. You don't have experience, I know, so I brought help. Amelia is excellent. She's worked on 3 houses in Westchester." I froze. "Mom, this is Ethan's and my home. I've already chosen the design, and we just moved in less than 2 weeks ago." Amelia stepped forward with a friendly smile. "We only need 1 session to survey. Nothing will change if you're not ready." Linda didn't wait for my response. She walked straight inside, Amelia and the man trailing behind. Ethan was in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, glancing at me, then at his mother, saying nothing. I followed, anger rising. Linda pointed around the rooms. "This living room wall needs repainting. The color doesn't suit afternoon light. The kitchen window needs sheer white curtains, looks more refined. The wood floors need polishing right now, it looks low grade." I clenched my fists. Ethan set down his glass and stepped closer. "Mom, Aveline chose everything herself." Linda turned to him, her tone softer but still commanding. "And I'm sure she has taste, but this is a family home. Everyone who visits will judge. I just want to make sure your careers move forward smoothly." Ethan didn't disagree. He didn't agree. He stayed silent. I lifted my head, speaking slowly. "I spent nearly all my savings to buy this house. I chose every lamp, every tile, every cabinet so my parents could walk in and feel welcomed." Linda smiled, unbothered. And they'll be even prouder when this home truly meets standards. Your parents will be proud to see you live up to your station. I turned to Ethan. What do you think? He looked at me, eyes flicking away. Mom only wants the best for us. We can at least hear her out, see what she suggests. Something inside me shattered into pieces, not because of curtains or floors, but because I was being pushed aside in the very space I had built. No one asked, no one respected. That night, after they left, I gathered the scattered blueprints. Amelia had left behind a folder detailing every upgrade. The downstairs room I had prepared for my parents was marked potential tea room or library. The next page showed velvet sofas, glass bookshelves, and vintage chairs in place of the bed where my father would rest. I didn't cry. I just opened the drawer, pulled out the folder with the house deed, checked the co-ownership clause, then closed it again, carefully, gently, as though I were folding away the last of my tired faith. I've always believed some moments in life need no witnesses to redefine who you are. That night, standing with my parents in the chilly air, watching my father tremble in chest pain while my mother fought to stay composed, I understood what my final boundary was. Just a week earlier, I had still believed things could be repaired. That between differences and conflicts, I could carve out a small space of my own. I had spent nearly a month preparing for the housewarming party, every detail chosen with the care of someone who had never before had the chance to create something like this. The guest list wasn't long, only about 30 people. A few close colleagues, 2 old classmates, a friendly couple from the neighborhood, and of course, my parents. I had arranged light food that suited my father's diet, prepared a special chair so my mother could sit without back pain, and made sure the pathway was step-free in case a wheelchair was needed. Ethan said he would help me tidy up that morning, but when I woke up, he was already gone. On the kitchen table was a note scribbled in haste. I went to Mom's to pick up some decorations. I'll be back by noon. I didn't suspect anything. I still believed that even though Ethan never dared say no to his mother, at the very least he respected my boundaries. Around 1 p.m., while I was arranging flowers on the table, the doorbell rang. My heart lifted a little, thinking my parents had come earlier than expected. But it wasn't them. Standing at the door was a group of people I had never met. 2 women in leather jackets, heavily made up, a man holding an expensive gift box, and 3 more stepping out of a glossy black SUV parked right in front of my gate. And in the middle of them was Linda. "Surprise!" she shouted, arms wide open as if I should be delighted. I froze. "What's going on, Mom?" Linda walked straight in, her heels tapping lightly against the hardwood floor. "The housewarming party, of course. I invited a few more friends, Charles's old partners, some ladies from the charity board. Great for Ethan's networking." I looked around as strangers began setting gifts on the table, shrugging off their coats like it was their home. One casually walked into the kitchen asking, "Where's the coffee?" Another looked at the living room and commented, "A bit dark in here. Lovely space, but the lighting needs work." I called Ethan. He didn't pick up. Linda turned to me, phone in hand, fingers still texting. "I already called catering. The appetizer is baked scallops with cheese. Oh, and I hired valet. They'll be here in 30 minutes. Can't have cars clogging up the front of the house." I couldn't breathe. Everything I had prepared was swept away as if it never existed. I went into the kitchen and opened the fridge. My tray of sandwiches from that morning had been shoved aside, replaced with trays of cold cuts from Linda's favorite restaurant. I stepped out to the backyard. The wooden table I had repainted with my father was now covered with a white cloth and white lilies. The chairs had been swapped out for shiny metal ones. A man was setting up a mini bar in the corner. I sat down on the back steps, clenching my hands together to steady myself. I didn't dare imagine how my parents would feel if they saw this. A party I promised would be warm and intimate turned into a flashy reception orchestrated by someone else. Around 4:30, I finally received a text from Ethan. Mom said your parents came early, so better to let them stop by after the main dinner. Less chaos. I shot up, called him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, I've been preparing for my parents for days. I'm not changing plans. They will come on time. If you don't open the door, I will. No reply. At 5:30, I drove to pick up my parents as planned. My mother wore the gray coat she had cherished for years, holding a box of homemade pastries. My father wore the shirt I had given him for Christmas, his hair freshly cut. They were cheerful, unsuspecting. Nervous? Mom asked. How many guests will be there tonight? I smiled at her. Maybe more than expected. As we pulled up to the house, I felt something was wrong. Luxury cars lined the curb all the way to the corner. In front of my house stood a man in uniform, guarding the entrance. Sorry, is this the Cunningham party? What's your name? A chill went down my spine. I'm the homeowner, and these are my parents. The man stepped aside awkwardly. I helped my mother out of the car, my father following slowly behind. I rang the bell. No one came. I knocked. Music thumped inside, laughter spilling out clearly. Through the frosted glass, I saw shadows moving, but no one looked our way. I pulled out my key. It didn't work. The locks had been changed. I called Ethan. Still nothing. I texted, We are at the door. My father needs to come in now. It's freezing outside. No reply. My mother pulled her collar close. My father's breathing quickened, his hand gripping the step. I wrapped my scarf around him. My mother's hands trembled as she opened the pastry box, still warm. Maybe they didn't hear the bell, she whispered. I ran around to the backyard. The sliding kitchen door was slightly open. I knocked hard. A waiter appeared. I need to come in. I am the homeowner. My parents are outside in the cold, and my father has a heart condition. Please open the door. He glanced at me, then turned inside. Linda appeared moments later, a glass of wine in her hand. Aveline, what's the problem? My parents are standing in the cold. The locks were changed. I can't reach Ethan. What party are you hosting here? Her brows furrowed slightly. Dinner with people important for Ethan's future. I had planned to tell you your parents should arrive later. I didn't hear the rest. I spun back to the front. My father was slumped against my mother, his face pale, lips turning color. I called for an ambulance. For the first time in years, my voice cracked out of control. My father began leaning sideways, collapsing onto my mother's frail arms. His head dropped against her shoulder, drained of strength. My mother trembled, struggling to hold him up, panic in her eyes, her lips blue and quivering soundlessly. I grabbed my father's shoulders, feeling the damp chill of sweat through his shirt. His face had gone gray, eyes half closed. I touched his forehead ice cold. Dad, can you hear me? I called firmly. He groaned faintly, clutching his chest, fingers curling as if grasping for something. I jumped up, pounding the glass door. Is anyone in there? Open the door. My father needs help. The music inside had softened, but still played. Through the glass, I saw people glance over, hearing the commotion, yet no one approached. My house, the one I poured nearly all my savings into, had become a glowing cage I no longer belonged to. With no other choice, I dashed to the side of the house where the basement window hadn't been refitted yet. I crouched down, yanked the small metal door. It stuck, but wasn't locked. I scraped away dust along the edge, squeezed through the gap, my coat snagging and tearing at the shoulder. The hem ripped wide open. I fell hard onto the cold cement floor, vision spinning from the impact. My left knee went numb, but I didn't stop. I scrambled up, following the dim light toward the stairs. Above, glasses clinked. Perfume and grilled meat mingled in the air. I passed through the living room. Linda stood by the bar, chatting with a silver-haired man I'd never met. Ethan was there too, nodding along, oblivious to what was happening at the very door. I didn't pause. I bolted to the front door, wrenched it open. A blast of cold air swept in, startling guests who turned to look. I ran outside, dropped to my knees beside my father. His lips were purple, his breath shallow and broken. I pulled him into my arms, pressed my hand inside his coat to feel his pulse. So faint. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone twice before dialing 911. My father has heart disease. He's in serious distress. We need an ambulance now. Address is 28 Lakeview Road, Glenview Suburbs, gray door with red maples in the yard. My voice cracked at the end. I heard the operator confirm, rapid keystrokes clicking in the background. I wrapped my scarf around Dad's neck, then draped my mother's shawl over her shoulders. She collapsed beside me, her eyes wild, whispering in broken words. Why would they lock the door? Why would they do this? Your father, he can't last like this. I pulled her close, steadying her shoulders. I'm here. I won't let anything happen. One woman from inside, maybe. The only guest with a shred of conscience stepped out, flustered at the sight. We didn't know. I didn't answer. I stared at the house, at the silent faces still watching from within as if it were theater. Linda finally emerged. Gone was her cheer. Her face was rigid, displeasure etched into every line. What happened? She asked, as though something had disrupted her perfect soiree. I didn't turn back, my voice low and controlled. My father is in critical condition, and my home was locked against us. If anything happens to him, Linda stepped back. Before she could say more, the wail of sirens cut through the night. Lights flashed as the ambulance pulled up. Guests shifted uneasily, some setting down their glasses, murmuring before retreating inside. Paramedics rushed out. I waved them over. They checked his pulse, blood pressure, carefully lifting him onto the stretcher. One turned to me. He's showing signs of oxygen deprivation and severe hypothermia. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. I gripped my father's hand. I'm coming. The medic nodded, making room for me. Before climbing in, I glanced back at the house. Ethan had just stepped out, eyes wide as if waking from a long dream. Aveline. I didn't answer. The ambulance doors closed. I sat beside my father, watching his pale face wrapped in blankets under the stark white lights. My mother followed behind in her car with another medic. The siren roared, the vehicle cutting through the dark. In my mind, the question was no longer why. It was since when had I allowed myself to be treated this way? And why had I stayed silent so long that they believed they could do anything to me and to my parents without consequence? I spent the night at the hospital, seated by my father's bed, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor under the bluish glow of the emergency room lights. My mother dozed off in a chair by the wall, her dry hand still gripping his, as though if she let go, everything would slip away. The doctor said, "We made it just in time." My father had hypothermia and signs of arrhythmia. 10 more minutes, and the outcome would have been unthinkable. I looked at my father lying still, torn between pain and fury. Every beep of the monitor felt like a slap, reminding me of all the things I had stayed silent about. I used to believe that kindness would keep people from crossing boundaries. But I forgot one truth: when someone never sees others as boundaries, kindness only invites intrusion. Around 7 a.m., my mother woke, dazed, her eyes vacant as she glanced around. She didn't ask questions. She simply turned to my father, gently stroked his hair, and sighed. "If anything happens to him, I'll never forgive it, my dear." I gripped her hand, my chest burning. Instead of empty comforts, I stood, kissed my father's forehead, and left the hospital. I needed to go back to that house. I needed to know what had truly happened. When I stepped inside, the house was steeped in silence. Traces of the previous night's party lingered, wrinkled tablecloths, half-empty wine glasses, the faint smell of perfume and cigarette smoke still hanging in the air. Ethan sat at the dining table in a t-shirt and pajama pants, looking like he had just woken from a late sleep. His face was tired, but not the least bit worried. "You didn't stay at the hospital?" he asked without looking up. I stared at him for a long moment, then walked past toward the stairs without answering. I opened the door to his office, the room he rarely let me enter, calling it his private space for investment projects. I pulled open the desk drawers decisively, not because of suspicion, but because a sharp certainty told me something here went beyond neglect. I found a folder marked with a blue sticky note. Property and residency, reviewed. I opened it. On the first page was a residency. Registration form for two people, Linda Sullivan and Charles Sullivan. The new address listed was this house. I froze, my mind blank for a few seconds. Then I flipped further. Beneath it was a signed contract with a high-end design firm. Ethan's signature scrawled at the bottom. Attached was a bank statement. More than $22,000 transferred to the firm 3 days earlier from our joint account. I kept going. A detailed renovation estimate appeared, with notes like, convert ground floor room into private suite for parents, remove guest bed to build library, add secondary lounge for long-term guests. My hands shook as I pulled out the final sheet. A receipt for $50,000 in cash withdrawn from our joint account. Reason noted as supporting event expenses and preparing family relocation. I left the room and walked downstairs. Ethan was pouring coffee, startled when he saw me. "What were you looking for up there?" I held up the folder. "Do you want me to read it aloud, or should I just ask you directly?" He stiffened, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's not what you think." I looked at him, every word cutting deep as it left my mouth. "You used our money to host a party I knew nothing about, hired designers without my input, signed contracts for your parents to move into this house, and now you're saying it's not what I think?" He exhaled, bracing himself on the table. Mom wanted stability. She thought this was a good step for both families to bond. "I plan to tell you after the party." After my father was hospitalized from standing in the cold for nearly 30 minutes. After I crawled through a basement window into my own house like a thief. Ethan stayed silent. His face showed confusion, but not remorse. "I can't understand how I became the outsider in my own home," I went on, my voice steady, though my eyes betrayed me. "Did you ever think of my Justefer parents? They gave everything so you could have a wife who belonged anywhere your family stood. And they were treated like strangers pushed out the door." He bowed his head. "My mom just thought that Linda doesn't think. She decides. And you let her. No one in your family respects me. But the worst part, Island, neither do you." He stepped closer, speaking softer. "I didn't think it would go this far." I turned away. "No one thinks, but you allowed it." One step after another, I left the kitchen, passed through the living room, still stinking of stale food and heavy perfume. I didn't stop to pick up the abandoned wine glasses, didn't bother closing the half-open fridge. I only climbed the stairs, opened the closet, pulled out an old suitcase, and began packing clothes. Downstairs, Ethan didn't call after me, no apologies, no plea to stay. I think he understood. Or at least he felt the distance between us had grown beyond marital conflict. It was betrayal, carefully nurtured by compromise, avoidance, and silence. I had already lost too much to this marriage. But the one thing I would never trade was my self-respect and the safety of the people who raised me. And at that point, I had no choice but to stand up and reclaim everything taken. I left the house with only a rolling suitcase, without looking back. Walking out that door, I felt no regret, only a cold clarity. I drove straight to Elise's apartment, my closest friend since college, a lawyer specializing in property and family law. She lived in the Loop, on the 16th floor of a tidy, quiet building. Elise opened the door the moment I rang. Before she could speak, I collapsed into her arms. We didn't talk much that night. I handed her the folder, the bank statements, the signed design contract, and even a printed email confirming payments from our joint account. Elise sat still, eyes scanning each page. The lamplight glinted against her thin-framed glasses, sharpening her face. "You let them change the locks without your consent?" she asked. I nodded, answering wearily. When I came back, my parents were already locked out. My father was hospitalized right after. Elise stayed quiet for a moment, then placed the file on the table. "Aveline, if it weren't you, this is exactly the kind of case we rush into emergency court the same day." They didn't just violate joint property rights, they could also face charges for endangering an elderly person. I froze. I heard every word, but it still felt like she was speaking about someone else. "Elise, I don't want to make this bigger than it island, but my parents don't deserve this, and I can't let it go on." She squeezed my hand, her tone softening. "You're not making it bigger, you're protecting yourself." The next morning, we stood at my house at 8 a.m. Elise had prepared all the legal paperwork to prove ownership rights and request emergency lock changes. A local officer came along, as required. I stood before my own home, noticing the floral garlands Linda had hung still in place, while the pots I had planted were shoved into corners. Then the locksmith arrived. Each click of the old locks being removed sliced cleanly into the past I had once endured in silence. We went inside. Elise carried an inventory list. I checked each room. In the ground floor bedroom meant for my parents, Linda's dresses and cosmetics were already in the closet. In the nightstand drawer lay her and Charles's spare passports, updated with this house as their registered residence. In Ethan's office, I found a renovation draft from the design firm, labeled "Private Library for Charles. Start next week." Elise photographed everything. The evidence was no longer scattered, it was an entire plan, constructed long ago, precise, deliberate, and utterly void of respect. I requested a formal meeting with the other side, Ethan, Linda, and Charles. Elise arranged for it to be held at her office, where every word would be recorded, with legal witnesses present. The meeting was set for later that afternoon. At 3:15, they arrived. Linda wore a gray blazer, Charles kept sunglasses on indoors, and Ethan followed behind, pale and hollow-eyed, still silent. Elise invited them to sit. I was already there, folder neatly in front of me. "Thank you for coming," Elise began, polite but firm. "Today's meeting is to clarify actions taken regarding the property at 28 Lakeview and to set conditions necessary to avoid litigation." Linda arched a brow. "I don't see what needs litigating. This is family business." Elise opened the folder. "Mrs. Sullivan, you changed the locks of a house my client co-owns. You used that address on residency forms. You also directly contracted a design firm and paid them with funds from the couple's joint account without her consent. That constitutes property infringement. And if the health impact on an elderly individual, specifically Mr. Raymond Foster, is linked, it could amount to elder endangerment." Linda's face strained. Charles slammed the table. "Who do you think you're threatening? I've invested in this family, do you realize that?" Elise remained calm. "I'm referring to criminal statutes, and I represent the legal property owner." I looked straight at Ethan. "Do you object?" He stayed silent, long enough that I thought he'd never answer. Then he raised his head. "I'll return all the money. I'll sign everything. I have no reason left to defend this." Linda gasped. Ethan! He turned to her for the first time in years, meeting her eyes without flinching. You nearly killed my father-in-law for a dinner party with people he didn't even know. That house is not our family stage. I didn't look away from him. I didn't feel triumph. Only a slight easing in my chest, as though the final door had opened not to keep him in, but to let me step out. Elise outlined the conditions: full reimbursement of all funds withdrawn from the joint account, including $50,000 in all catering and design costs. Payment of Mr. Raymond Foster's hospital bills in full. A written agreement barring Linda and Charles from entering, residing in, or altering the property without both spouses' signatures. I added one last clause. If any of these terms are violated, I will file a formal petition in state court. Linda began to protest, but Charles gripped her shoulder firmly. We've gone too far, Linda. They signed. They had no choice. Ethan remained quiet until the end, signing with a heavy hand, the confidence gone from his face. He didn't apologize. But I didn't need words anymore. I needed action. And at least this time he chose correctly. I left Elise's office carrying no folder. Everything had been copied and secured properly. I took only one thing with me, the conviction that from this moment forward, I would never step back again. No one could take away the place I called home. No one could erase my parents from the life I had built with my own hands. And, above all, no one could dismiss respect simply because they were used to living in control. The rumor started as nothing more than a small ripple, whispered during a tea party of the Lakeview Charity Board ladies. One woman leaned in to another, and soon the story of an elderly man left outside in the cold until he collapsed right at his daughter's housewarming spread through every corner of the city's high society. No one said names out loud, but everyone knew it was about Linda and Charles. Things escalated when one of my mother's old friends, Evelyn Stroud, a longtime figure in the Women for Community Arts Council, called me directly to confirm. Her voice dropped as she asked, "Is it true Raymond collapsed from being left outside Aveline's house too long with no one opening the door? People are saying Linda and Charles changed the locks without telling the actual owner." I didn't sugarcoat it. "It's true, Evelyn. My father had to be rushed to the hospital. And everything happened behind my back." A week later, Linda was struck off the executive board of Midwest Families for Legacy. The letter and email notice were short, stating simply that she was no longer aligned with the organization's ethical standards. Fashion events and fundraisers where she'd once been the face quietly dropped her from their guest lists. Some old friends, who had always hovered around only for the Ashburn name, began to withdraw. The more Linda tried to act indifferent, the more pitiful she looked. She still wore her cashmere coats, doused herself in expensive perfume, and shopped at her usual boutiques, but no one invited her to sit at the main table at galas anymore. Charles, though less public, couldn't escape either. A real estate investment firm canceled negotiations with him after receiving an anonymous letter that included my father's medical report and a written account of the incident. As for Ethan, after the meeting at Elise's office, he moved out for a few weeks. I didn't stop him. I didn't call. I needed space to finally see clearly the shadows I had ignored for so long. He began therapy, I heard from Elise, who had recommended a family counselor friend to him. One Friday afternoon, Ethan came to see me, not to apologize, not to beg. He just stood at my door, empty-handed, his eyes tired but unhidden. "I just came from therapy," he said, "and I'm starting to understand why I always stayed silent. Since I was a boy, whenever I pushed back, Mom would throw out 'family is everything' to make me feel guilty. Dad didn't even need words. One look was enough to scare me." I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "And all through our marriage, you made me carry that weight for you." He nodded. "No excuses. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm learning to set boundaries. And if you'll allow it, I'll take full responsibility for what I've done." He left after a few minutes. I went back inside, no tears, no anger, just the sense of someone lifting a stone off my chest, the mark still pressed in, but at least I could breathe again. A week later, Ethan's sister Sophie sent me a message. "Mom forced me to quit art school to get a medical degree, even though I can't stand the sight of blood. I've never forgiven myself for obeying them. Thank you for making this come out in the open." She wasn't the only one. Ethan's youngest brother, Lucas, who had long cut ties with the family, suddenly posted a short video online, recalling when Charles made him break up with his girlfriend simply because she was the daughter of a grade school teacher. My father once told me, "If you marry someone without background, you'll ruin the family's reputation." Today, I want to say that reputation never protected anyone but my parents themselves. The internet buzzed. Public opinion split. Some who once admired the Ashburns now questioned everything, while others who had endured family control felt comforted seeing the truth named aloud. I didn't join the debates. I didn't post clarifications or defenses. I just sat with my parents in the backyard garden, where my father had replanted rows of purple lavender. My mother poured tea, her hands still trembling slightly. "Do you think it's all too harsh?" I shook my head, eyes on my father bent over the plants. "I think justice doesn't always arrive with applause, but silence helps injustice survive." She placed her hand on my shoulder, saying nothing more. The story of Linda and Charles no longer lived only in cocktail hours or society meetings. It had spilled beyond, becoming a voice for anyone once silenced in the name of family honor. And me from a wife nearly erased from her own life. I was standing firm, not for revenge, but so no one else would have to live under the same control I had endured. After months of storms, my life slowly returned to calm. My father, after heart rehab, grew stronger. Doctors said he needed rest, little stress, a peaceful mind. So I found a small house just 5 minutes walk from mine so my parents could move close, away from the pressure of their old town. On moving day, I placed a vase of lavender on the wooden table in their living room. My father walked in, smiled at me, his eyes shining with a peace I hadn't seen in years. My mother touched the kitchen counters, the window frames, then looked at me, her voice trembling. "You did all this by yourself?" I shook my head, holding her hand. "No, with you both beside me, I've never been alone." In the afternoons, I'd stop by with pastries or fresh vegetables. We'd sit on the porch, sipping tea, chatting about nothing special. Once, I might have called it boring. Now, every moment was precious. I adjusted my work too, no longer draining myself for massive projects. Instead, I began consulting for small businesses, single mothers, young couples starting out. I wanted to use my knowledge to help people like I once was not carrying everything in the dark, alone. Mornings, I woke without heaviness. I walked the dog, read, cooked. Some evenings, my mother and I baked apple tarts from my grandmother's recipe. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and pastry, filled with gentle laughter. Ethan still stayed in touch. He paid my father's hospital bills, never a day late. He reimbursed every cent from the joint account, sending a detailed list. Once, he wrote, "I don't dare hope for forgiveness, but I won't disappear. If you need anything, I'll be here." I read the message but didn't reply right away. Inside me was a very clear space, not anger but no longing either. I had loved him with full trust once. But trust, once broken, never mends the same. One early spring day, Ethan came to my house. He stood outside, holding white tulips, waiting for me to step out. "I know you're thinking about divorce," he said quietly. "And I'm not here to argue or justify. I just think you deserve happiness even if it doesn't include me anymore." I stayed silent for a long time, Finally, I asked, "Do you feel freer living apart from your parents?" He smiled, sad but honest. "I never thought I could breathe without them directing every step. But now I realize sometimes you have to step out of their arms to actually grow up." I nodded. Some stories need closing so the people inside them can keep living. We sat for a while without many words. When he rose to leave, I placed the tulips back into his hand. "Take them. You chose them, so they should be yours." Ethan looked at me for a long time, then nodded slightly and walked away. After that, I wrote a handwritten letter nearly 10 pages to Elise, asking her to prepare for a peaceful divorce. No disputes, no blame. Just a mutual agreement for two people who once walked together to part with the last measure of respect. Friends asked, "Don't you regret it? You two once loved each other." I smiled. "Of course I regret. But I'd regret more if I stayed in a marriage where silence was my only way to keep peace." I learned something. Family isn't defined by blood or by a marriage certificate. It's the place where you can breathe without judgment, speak honestly without fear of silence as punishment. Family is where you can be yourself and be loved for that self. I rebuilt the fence in front of my house, not to shut people out, but as a reminder, every relationship, even family, needs boundaries. Boundaries don't drain love. They keep love from being smothered by possession or control. One evening, while I watered the garden, my father called over from the other side of the parka fence. "Are you free tomorrow? Your mother wants to make carrot stew." I laughed, nodding. "I'll bring toasted bread, just don't add too much salt like last time." His chuckle floated across the fence, genuine and light, and I realized happiness doesn't need grandeur or perfection. It just needs to be safe enough, calm enough, and real enough that your heart no longer has to strain. Have you ever had to set your own boundaries to protect your peace? I don't blame those who once hurt me, but I'll never let them repeat it, because love without respect is only control. And family, the place meant to be safest, if it loses kindness, then you must be the one to build a new shelter for your soul. And you, what about you? What do you think of my story? Have you ever faced painful choices just to keep yourself whole? Share with me in the comments. Maybe your story will be the light for someone else who's weary out there. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel. There are many more stories about family, about limits, and about the brave choices we make in our lives. Thank you for listening to mine. I hope you find your own peace strong, steady, and beautiful.